Welcome, everyone. This gathering was originally planned as a gathering just of Temple Beth-El members to discuss the film 13th, and we are going to discuss it. But I want to acknowledge and appreciate Bob Krovitz, who is leading up our film group, and he would just like to say a word of welcome. So, Bob, thank you for your efforts, and stage is yours for a moment.
Thank you, Rabbi. Hi, I'm Bob Krovitz. I'm the coordinator of the film group at Temple Beth-El in Hillsborough. I am new to this role, and I started over the summer. At the time, I was trying to decide which film to discuss, and I spoke to Rabbi Gluck about it. He suggested 13th. This is an excellent suggestion, and it addresses a core Jewish value called tikkun olam. This phrase means repair of the world. We are taught that God gave us the world, our society, in an imperfect form, and we are commanded to make it better. I want to start by saying welcome to Reverend Mjumbe and his congregation. I watched the Zoom event on Martin Luther King Day, and I heard your comments. We remember the silence of our friends. To that, I respond with a quote from Elie Wiesel: "Indifference, to me, is the epitome of evil. Action is the only remedy to indifference." I'm a child of the 60s. I remember the start of the civil rights movement. I remember the famous photo of Abraham Joshua Heschel marching with Martin Luther King. We should strive to recapture those efforts to work together for a common good. It is remarkable to me that in only 150 years, our country has gone from slavery to a Black man elected president. It is equally remarkable that we have gone in only 100 years from a woman having the right to vote to having a Black woman elected vice president of the United States. I remember reading about how women were granted the right to vote. It all came down to the vote of one man in the legislature of Tennessee. It was a crucial vote for ratification. He was going to vote no, but he received a note from his mother. It said, "Hurrah," and vote for suffrage. And it ended with, "Don't forget to be a good boy." And he voted for women's rights. Thank God for mothers. I'm grateful to Rabbi Gluck for telling me about 13th. The problems we see in this movie are a part of tikkun olam. It's about the failure in ourselves to see the godliness in each other. I'm a computer scientist and I study human language. I know that when a child is about 18 months old, they acquire about one word per waking hour. It does not matter if the child is white or Black or Asian. It does not matter if the child is learning English or French or Hebrew or Chinese. The differences in these languages are small relative to the big picture of what is happening in the brain. I feel that this is a miracle, and it is like watching God in action. It shows us that we are all God's children. When I first joined Temple Beth-El, I learned about Rabbi Gluck's work with the Interfaith Hospitality Network. He started this when he first came to the synagogue and provides temporary homes for people who are homeless and helps them to get back on their feet. It is very successful, and this is based on the caring and the follow-up with the individuals. This effort reflects the value of tikkun olam. Similarly, I'm glad to hear about his work on bridging the problems with the Black and white communities. I'm grateful for his work last week and today. Uh, The film raises important questions about what is going on with our prison system and about the relationship between race and voting rights. So now I'd like to turn things over to Rabbi Gluck and Reverend Mjumbe.
So let me sign on here. And hang on. Okay. So thank you, Bob. That was a really wonderful introduction. So here's what we're going to do. I just want to say a word or two of welcome, and then Reverend Mjumbe and I are going to introduce ourselves, and we're going to say a few words about why we think this film is important and this discussion is important. And then what we're going to do is we're going to put out a number of questions that we're going to ask you to give your response to in the chat box. And we will react, we'll read them and interact to your responses. And then our hope is that we will go into breakout groups so that we can have an opportunity to engage in dialogue between our two congregations. So I want to welcome again Pastor Reverend Lukata Mjumbe and the members of the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. This gathering, as I said, began as an opportunity for members of Temple Beth-El to discuss a powerful and important film, as part of educating ourselves to seek understanding so that we might move toward pursuing justice. But the plan changed when, I would say by God's grace, I had the opportunity to meet Reverend Mjumbe and some of the members of Witherspoon. And because we had the opportunity to share the celebration of Martin Luther King Day last Sunday, and we heard Reverend Mjumbe's moving words. My instinct in planning that gathering was about the importance of hearing personal stories of people who have experienced racism in New Jersey. And Reverend Mjumbe gave us that and a whole lot more. He opened his arms and heart and invited us into relationship. And not just any kind of relationship, but I would say what we would call a genuine sense of encounter. The great Jewish philosopher of the 20th century, Martin Buber, spoke about different types of relationship. He spoke about relationships that he called I-it, when you relate to something as an object, or what he called I-thou, where you relate it as a subject, a genuine, mutual, true spiritual bond in which you connect with the wholeness of each other in full mutuality. As Reverend Mjumbe put it in his words last week, he said that to fulfill the commandment to love your neighbor, you have to know your neighbor. And even more so, if you want to truly know them, you have to live with them, you have to interact with them, you have to have true encounter. And I understood that to be a call to entering into genuine dialogue. And we've already begun that conversation. We had a conversation this past, in the middle of the week that I think could have gone on for much, much longer than it did, and it went on quite a ways. So we're hopeful that this gathering is the beginning of a genuine relationship, indeed many relationships between members of our community. So I'd like to invite first Reverend Mjumbe to say a word of welcome himself and to introduce himself and the members of his community. Lukata, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi Gluck. I'm just blessed to be able to be here with you and to be with Temple Beth-El. I'm looking at the different screens here, and it is great to be reconnected. And it's one thing for us to proclaim words. You know, there are a lot of words that are said around the time of the celebration of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And sometimes those words are only said once a year or recalled once a year, and we go back to our Dr. King book of quotations and we pull something out and we lift it up, but then we don't live it out for the rest of the year. And so I was blessed and pleased and excited when the invitation came for our congregation at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church to connect with this congregation and to be in conversation, to be in dialogue, to be sharing with one another, to be challenging one another. It is precisely what I imagined and was hopeful for when I talked about the importance of being able to call the names and to live with and share time and space with our neighbors before we could truly love them, and that we had to be intentional about doing that. I heard Bob cite Elie Wiesel earlier, and I preached some of those words, particularly as it relates to indifference. And Brother Wiesel also talked about that the opposite of love is not hate, but the opposite of love is indifference. And challenging that indifference is a part of what we're doing here today. I am Blessed to see that we have a few members. I suspect that more may be joining. Many of you may be fatigued from the previous week of all the Dr. King celebrations and ceremonies. I know that I've suffered from it a bit, but this really rejuvenates me, and I'm happy to see that we have some friends, we have some members, we have some of our leaders who have joined the call and will be joining the call. And I look forward not only to the broader group conversation, but I believe we're going to try to break out into some smaller groups. And so maybe we'll populate a Witherspoon member into each of those groups, however many there are, so that we can talk about this. And we're going to talk about why this is important. I think it is essential that we have a discussion, not just about 13th, the documentary by one of my favorite filmmakers, but also about the reality and the urgency of mass incarceration in this country, the intersection of race, of class, of criminal justice, and where we go from here, and where we go from here together. So, Rabbi Gluck, thank you for the invitation on behalf of Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church. To all of the congregation and for those who helped, my Princeton friends who are members of Temple Beth-El, who helped to make this connection. You've been described as reliable spies that gave a good report back. And so I thank God for the spies. So thank you for connecting us together. And I look forward to this discussion tonight. And there's just the beginning of a beginning. We have much more work to do together. Thanks.
Thank you, Reverend Mjumbe. So we're just each of us going to say, I think, another word about what we find important about this particular film and why it's important to discuss it. If Reverend Mjumbe, you already feel you've done that, that's fine, we can move on. But I just want to say a word also by way of some personal introduction. So I'm Rabbi Arnie Gluck, and I think members of my community know me awfully well at this point. But for the benefit of the members of the Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, I'm in my 30th year at Temple Beth-El, which has been a tremendous blessing. And we have always seen what you would describe as ministry, as a big part of our ministry, the pursuit of justice. And we've been growing in our sense of urgency about the addressing issues of racism in recent years. My own personal background is that I grew up as the child of civil rights activists. And my parents were among the leaders of a move that turned out to be one of the first efforts at school integration in the country. And I was sent by bus to school in the 3rd grade. I was born and was growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, and we were paired with a school in a predominantly Black neighborhood in East Elmhurst. And it was a powerful experience. As I told Reverend Mjumbe the other day, one of my earliest childhood memories was crossing the street coming home from school, passing a demonstration against school integration and being called as a 2nd grader, a child of a communist, and running upstairs and asking my mother, what's a communist? And she told me then that it was a badge of honor because it was an accusation that you actually saw people as equal and of bearing human dignity and the image of God. So, but I will tell you that as much as I have that as my background and have been involved in civil rights and human rights and social action, as Bob put it, tikkun olam, I must say that as I have made it a greater priority to become more educated, to read more broadly, to read authors like Isabel Wilkerson, whose books, The Warmth of Other Suns and Caste, are so important. And as I viewed this and film and other films, I must confess that I had a deep sense that whatever I knew, I didn't know enough. And whatever I understood, I didn't understand enough. And that the more I would understand, the more I knew and the more I felt I understood, the more I felt and the more urgent that sense of moving from understanding and knowing and feeling to action. The other thing I will say about the film at this point is this. It makes, I think, the most powerful point of all for me was that American society since 1865 has been predicated on a huge lie. And that is the claim that African Americans are perpetrators of violence, the myth of Black criminality that came to reassert slavery after emancipation. And the reason why that is such a pernicious lie is that it is actually the inverse of the truth, the opposite of the truth. Because the truth is that, in fact, African Americans, Black and brown Americans, have been the victims of violence overwhelmingly, not the perpetrators of violence, but its victims. And it is the ability to tell the lie and then to activate society's institutions to perpetuate and to institutionalize the oppression of Black and brown people on the basis of that lie. And then, of course, it's what we learn in this film about the use of law, how rather than the rule of law, we saw the rule by law, which is what fascists do. They use laws created by men that are intended to be tools of oppression. So the law was not used as a tool of protection, as law is supposed to do to protect people's rights, but in fact was used as a tool of oppression. And from the beginning of the 13th Amendment to this very day, I would say, speaking of the terms in which we speak these days, the virus of racism has mutated in multiple ways, finding new and even more harmful and degrading ways to harm, to devalue, to take the lives of people of color. And the time has come, as I think this film helps us to do, to dispel that lie by speaking truth, and then to move on from there to create a society grounded in true justice. Reverend Mjumbe, do you want to say something else about the film?
Yes, thank you. I co-sign on everything that you said, and I think it's timely now. We're coming up on an anniversary of the passage of the 13th Amendment. January 31st, next Sunday, will be the what is that? That would be 155 years. Is that right? 1865 to 2021, 56 years. That January 31st, 1865 is when it was ratified on December 6, 1865, was passed by Congress on the 31st of January. But what I just want to point out is not only is it based upon this lie, upon the criminality of Black people, in this moment when we've just celebrated the victory of an inauguration. There's a lot of hopefulness and excitement and euphoria about what might come in terms of new change. I think we should be very clear that this was, in its original context, seen as a great victory. It was the amendment to the Constitution which abolished slavery in the United States, that declared that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, and that the loophole, as they talk about in the documentary, that and Angela Davis, I guess we'll ask how many people actually have watched the film or remember it, because for some of us it may be a few years since the last time we watched it, or when we first watched it. She talked about how the danger of piecemeal strategies and of certain types of reform strategies that may look good or may seem politically plausible and acceptable at a certain moment, but how those same victories, laced with these loopholes, have provided the context for what we have today of mass incarceration, where we have more women and men who are in prison today in this country than we had during the heights of slavery. So as much as we talk about the horror, and I think Brian Stevenson talked towards the end about how people often said, oh, if I would have been alive during that time, I never would have stood for that. It would have been unacceptable. How is it possible that people would allow for this type of social, economic, and political reality to exist? And he says, well, you're living in it right now. And we are living in it right now. And so just as a cautionary word, that we need to be very careful about the ways in which we decontextualize ourselves from our own historical moment, but also to be very careful that even in the midst of victory, in the midst of success, in the midst of progress, that we can also leave back doors open and loopholes available for there to be recreations of the cycle and the legacy of bondage and oppression that we've seen going back to 1619 and before, and moving forward all the way into 2021 and beyond if we don't make a serious change. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So now we'd like to invite you, the participants, to join us in this dialogue. Let me just see how many we are. We are 50.
We are 50.
Which puts us onto 2 screens. So I think what we'll do, which is wonderful, that's great. Reverend Mjumbe and I were talking about our hopes for this gathering, and we're of 2 minds. On the one hand, we would have loved an intimate conversation. On the other hand, we want to involve as many of our folks in the dialogue as possible. So it's wonderful. Are we all on one screen? No, it looks like we're now on one screen.
I got us onto one screen.
You got us onto one screen. So if you want to use the chat, you can use the chat, but you can also, if you want, just raise your hand. And I believe, is there a place to raise your hand? Yes. If you look on the mirror, on the ribbon at the bottom of where your tools are, there's a place where it says reactions. And there's a little button there that says raise hand. So we're going to put out some questions, and we'll invite you to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and to answer the question. So our first question is, what did you learn from this film that you didn't know before? Henry, Nuremberg. You have to unmute, Henry.
Yeah, I thought somebody else, I saw some other people. Just quickly, there were in any number of things that were really shocking to me, but the one thing that I absolutely didn't know anything about was this organization that they referred to as ALEC, which was the American Legalization Exchange Committee or Commission, something like that. I don't know. Seemingly innocuous name, but and they would work with conservatives and just get legislation molded, which would just forever work on finding ways to constrain and to just make it ever more difficult.
Repress.
Yeah, to repress, right, exactly. I don't want to take
American
up
Legislative Exchange Council.
Legislative Exchange Council, yeah. So I'm going to let other people speak, but that was...
Let's all try to keep our comments very brief,
Yeah,
okay?
that's it.
Ruth
Okay.
Gold.
That was the big one, the ALEC. But we all knew it existed, but we didn't know it was a formal group. But it wasn't a surprise that it existed.
Right. By the way, one of their major agendas was voter suppression. Right. Ed Malberg. When you speak, and actually one other use of the chat box, Reverend Mjumbe and I introduced ourselves. We would love if you would take a moment and in the chat box, introduce yourself, which congregation you're from, and just so that we can have that to see who everybody is. Ed Malberg. And tell us which congregation you're from before you say what you have to say.
Okay, I'm Ed Malberg. I'm with Temple Beth-El. I wanted to preface what I'm about to say with an indication that I teach U.S. history at Raritan Valley Community College. There was at one of the same time within the presentation itself, there was in fact nothing that I hadn't heard before, including ALEC, which has been around for quite some time in a number of different areas. But this particular documentary does a superb job as one of the, actually, I think as Ava DuVernay says herself in conversation later on, it does a marvelous job of putting it all together, of linking the dots. And in fact, the only thing that that has been said so far with which I would take exception, 1865 is a convenient date, and the 13th Amendment and its loopholes is a good, convenient public relations tool. In fact, we're dealing with a history of dehumanization of the African derived peoples in America that go back well before. When in 1831, the anti-slavery movement got its real start, its motto was, "Am I not a man and a brother?" And the big thing that they were trying to do was to build the notion that slaves weren't slaves, they weren't animals, they were people who had to be recognized in the same way that other whites were. And this is a movement that predates the 13th Amendment by at least 3 decades.
Arnie, you're muted.
I just said something really important. I heard it. In addition to reacting to the question, what did you learn that you didn't know before? Feel free also to share with us what you think is the most important thing that you learned or that we can learn from this film. I see Liz or Dave. I don't know which one of you, Liz or Dave Cohen.
You should have known, Arnie. It was me.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to answer both of your questions. One of the most shocking things, and I thought it was really interesting that you started out with the story about being called a communist when you were in 2nd grade, because the big interesting thing about ANJEC to me is that virtually all of the oppression was about a profit motive. You know, all of this legislation to have free labor in the prisons. The most surprising little factoid that I caught was that as part of the legislation, there's a requirement that these for-profit prisons be kept full. And I'm totally at a loss how the American government could pay farmers not to farm, but we couldn't pay, you know, to keep jails empty if there weren't enough criminals to fill them. But I think that profit motive is the most important aspect of it to me, because that's so pernicious. that even if there's universal motivation to overcome the injustices, there are going to be these hidden, invisible hands, right? Trying to keep it all going.
Reverend Mjumbe, I want to invite you just to stay unmuted so that you feel you can jump in and comment on whatever anybody wants.
Well, I thank you, Arnie. And I wanted to respond to that because, I think it's important to note, as Ed talked about earlier, that we don't need to frame this in such a way to think it's very narrow. One, certainly it goes back, the struggle around this resistance to it and institutionalization of it goes back far beyond 1865. I mean, we could go all the way back to the first Africans who were dehumanized and captured and enslaved by the Portuguese back in 1444. I mean, there is a legacy of resistance, whether that be with a Harriet Tubman, whether that be with a Denmark Vesey or a Gabriel Prosser or a Nat Turner or all of the other unnamed people who were in rebellion to it. But the permanent commitment to it is rooted so much in the profit motive. And when we understand that, it's why when you look at this documentary, you might want to be quick to say, oh, well, it's the conservatives. Or it's the Republicans. No, it's not simply it's not simply conservatives. It's not simply Republicans. There are Democrats. It's not simply white people. There were black people. There were white people who all got caught up and have been ensnared within this religion of prison, this dehumanization and this commodification of people. And it's also one of the things that we have to understand about when we challenge it, why it's so difficult. Because it is so profitable for so many corporations, for so many individuals, for so many politicians who receive resources and funding and campaign support. It makes the challenge that much greater. So if we simply go at this in our analysis or in our strategy from a partisan sort of viewpoint, or even in a narrow historical viewpoint, we'll miss it. We'll miss the range and the scope of the enemy that we're facing here. And we also need to be able to frame. It's very interesting how many of us will speak of Harriet Tubman in fond words. At one point, they were talking about putting her on the $20 bill, with forgetting that she was challenging a legal institution, which was slavery. She was breaking people out of prison. That's what Harriet Tubman was doing. We as religious people forget that our prophets, that our leaders, that our great religious heroes and sheroes often found themselves in prison. And the best people I know have been in prison, or even in prison now, or hopefully will be out of prison soon. And so, again, not taking ourselves out of the historical context and not divorcing ourselves from the understanding of the intensity and the complexity of the challenge that we're having to address is really important for us to discover our way forward. Other questions and comments that people want to share? Is there anybody from Witherspoon that wants to say anything?
Yes, I just raised my hand.
Ah, there you are, up there. Sherry Campbell, go ahead.
Hold on, hold on. Okay, so what did I learn? I learned a lot. I think that the overarching thing to learn as a result of this documentary, I too am a child of the 60s. I was educated here in Princeton, first at St. Paul's Catholic School, and then Valley Road School and Princeton High School. And I got no history that spoke to any of what I learned or what could be learned from a documentary such as The 13th. And so I think what's to be learned here is how much we don't know, that there's so much we don't know, and how important and critical it is that we change educational systems so that people are completely aware of what's has happened, of our real history, our true history. Because as I've often heard people say of the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, if we don't know the history, it could repeat itself. And I think that's what we're seeing today, is some of this history repeating itself. Yeah, well, it never really went away.
Mm-hmm.
It's repeating itself.
Reemerged. Mm-hmm.
There is definitely a nexus between. I mean, I think that it's fair to describe. I mean, one of the most egregious sinful things ever done in a democracy is extra legal things like lynching.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that the violence, by law enforcement violence against people of color is modern day lynching.
Yeah, I agree.
Harriet, I see your hand up, and then Talitha and Mariamu.
I'm Harriet Thaler, Temple Beth-El. The word that comes to my mind about this movie is illuminating. I mean, it just, starting with the birth of a nation and then giving all the other information on all the egregious things that went on in terms of the political involvement and the prison situation, and giving the numbers as they went up was just did shine such a light. I mean, I knew about a lot of this, but certainly not enough. And at the end, I think that young man who was so brutalized and arrested for no reason and kept in prison for 3 years, and then
Khalif Browder.
yes, suicided. I mean, that brought it all home. You know, that moment there. Just that's it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Talitha Kumi?
Talitha Kumi.
You're
on mute.
Thank you. What was alarming to me were the numbers, to see the numbers. I have felt it, in my community growing up. But as an African-American woman with 3 brothers, to see the statistics that 1 in 4 African-American males will be in prison at some point of their lifetime.
1 in 3.
1 in 3 now. Okay, 1 in 3. And I think it was like 1 in 17, or it's higher, for white males.
For whites, 1 in
And
17.
right. And the statistics between how many we are in our population versus how many of us are in prison was alarming for me. And
6% of Black
6%,
and
48%
48% of prison. 48%
there you go, Pastor. Right. So part of my story is I was arrested in Princeton 3 years ago, and I never told anybody when it happened to me because of my guilt and shame surrounding it. And so for me, whenever I hear about anyone being pulled over, I was racially profiled for the type of car I was driving in Princeton, here in Princeton. So it's so easy for us to say those over there, or it happens over here, but it happens everywhere and it happens to everyone. They, dropped everything when they realized that I didn't have a record or anything, but it could have easily gone another way. So it really hits home for me personally, hits home for my family. And in terms of me thinking about the Black family and the Black community, how it impacts us for generations and for generations to come when we don't pass down this information to our children. We tell them that slavery is over, but slavery is very much alive in our time.
Thank you.
Mariamu.
Good evening. I'm Mariamu Mjumbe, a member of Ebenezer AME Church in Fort Washington, Maryland, and I'm Lukata's mother. My first response was very visceral to this film. I could not watch the whole thing at one time. I was born in 1941. So when Emmett Till was murdered, he and I were the same age.
Right.
And as I went through and watched it, my response was very visceral. The tears would come, and I'm almost still doing it because it touched so many places inside of me. And I wondered as I watched this, are other people who are watching this, especially white people, are they feeling what I feel? Are they putting themselves in my place as a mother, as a grandmother? I was a part of the civil rights movement, but when I was a grandmother and my grandson was stopped one night, my grandson, a football player, a honor roll student in college, home for the holidays, working a part-time job to earn some more money so he could go back to school. He is pulled over and stopped and ended up with a gun from the policeman to his head and on the ground and in jail for no reason. And I said, I wonder when you watch it, do you feel or can you feel what I feel? It was just, I could not watch the whole thing at one time. I had to watch it in two parts. And what Brian Stevenson said at the end is that we are still in it after all this time, after all of the civil rights movements, after all of the demonstrations. Ingram X. Kendi wrote a book called Stamped from the Beginning. And all it does, it seems, is the laws change to fit the situations to keep Black people still on the plantation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. That actually sparks, I don't know whether Lukata, you want to respond to Mom. Give Mom the last word there.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
So let me add another question that picks up on Mariama's question, and particularly maybe for our Jewish participants to respond to first, but anyone can respond. Share an emotional reaction or feeling that the film evoked. So that's specifically Mariama's question is, when you see such pernicious, such egregious oppression and victimization, what were some of the things that touched you emotionally, and what was your emotional reaction?
Can I add to that question as well?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is bridging some of what my mother said in that question. There's an image that they show during the film of a lynching in 1930. It was actually on August 7th, 1930. And the reason why I know of this particular lynching is because the lynching was in my grandmother's hometown in Marion, Indiana. There were two men that were hanging from a tree in front of the courthouse, Abram Smith and Thomas Shipp. And there was a third person who was her childhood best friend and classmate named James Cameron, who actually escaped from the lynching. And so as a child, it was something that we knew about growing up. But the question I want to ask is you don't just see the two men that are hanging from a tree. You see a crowd, a mob of white people who are standing and pointing back. They would make postcards of these lynching scenes, and they would cut off fingers and ears and noses and other body parts and keep them as souvenirs. And so I always know how it makes me feel when I see Mr. Shipp and Mr. Smith and think about Mr. Cameron, the two men hanging from the tree and the third that could have. But I've never really had the opportunity to ask white people, what do you think about the crowd? What does that say to you? I identify with the men hanging from the tree. And I wonder what it is that you think about the crowd. And I'll push it even further. Do you think there were any Jewish people that possibly could have been in that crowd? in Marion, Indiana? And if there were, what might that make you feel, and what emotional response might that generate?
Simona.
Okay, if you allowed me, I want to say, Simona Rivkin, I am Temple Beth-El member. I know Arnie for as long as I know Arnie. It's a few things I want to say. How you feel? I wasn't able to watch part of the movie, not of course as much as your mother said, when they show lynching. And that's how my feeling goes. When they show this on a screen and you use sometimes words lynching in a historical text, it doesn't hit you as bad as when you see it. Then your emotions go much deeper. And by the way, when I closed my eyes, I saw the crowd. Crowd make me outrageous, but crowd like the show. Besides, if you take history of France or 18th century, 16, when they, forget Rome, my husband said Rome, when they cut heads on guillotines, people came and cheered. For some reason, people like blood and people like, so I don't know if it's different really. Could there be Jewish people there? I would never answer to you. Can I feel the same? I would like to say what your mother said. Probably not, because all of us has our stone in our shoulders. I am Jewish. I know as much as possible about Holocaust. So the way I feel tragedy of Holocaust, I cannot be very honest to tell you, feel what you feel. But I can intellectually understand. And by understanding that, my understanding that we have to do everything that's possible to change it, to stop it, to be together, to engage in finally create an equal, peaceful, and correct world. And at the end, I want to say, Angela Davis, I grew up in Russia. I remember when she came to Russia. She was such a sensation, and they all call her communist, and she was good. So I'm excited to see her in the movie.
So I would want to respond and say that the thought that Jewish people could watch a human being being murdered brutally makes me nauseous. And I must say that, you know, the Hillel's great teaching that what is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow, suggests that when you see somebody else, you see yourself in them. And when I see this film, and that's a watchword of the way I look at any time people are being treated in a way that, you know, I think, would I, if I see, the ultimate ethical move is to see yourself in their place. And it's not a hard thing for Jewish people to do, because the images that are evoked so readily are images of Nazis not only brutalizing and murdering Jewish people, but mocking them and laughing and making sport and playing. So we each in our particularity experience this universal proclivity to depravity that I don't know, how does one excise that or exorcise that from the human soul, the ability to treat human beings with such depravity. I don't know, but it brings tears. I don't know whether I couldn't tell whether at moments I wanted to cry, at moments I wanted to scream. at seeing those images. First, I think I don't know how to pronounce your name. Siding? Tell me your name. D-I-N-G?
Yeah, Sengan Dominic Jang.
Please tell us your name. I'm sorry.
Sengan Dominic Jang.
Pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I couldn't hold myself. I thought I was just gonna listen and learn, but so I want to respond to Mama Mariam about her question. So a little bit about me. I'm from Senegal, which is West Africa, and I've been here over 20 years. And I've met really, really beautiful people here. I've met some other that are not that, nothing to talk about. But what I will say about that question, I feel like it is not a fair question because people are not a monologue. It's not like a monologue of just Jewish or white. They're just decent people and also not so decent people. And to me, my experience is decent people are more than not so decent people. And through my experience, luckily, many people that I met who are not my color of my skin. And by the way, I never knew I was Black until I came to the United States. And people in different races will see you either as an equal. My experience is when I met a Jewish mother, she looked at me as a son. That's my personal experience. And what I do know is human being will always fight justice because there are people who are just horrible. And I want to be careful about asking white people how they feel because to me, they're not a monologue. Although there are such a thing as white supremacy. And to me, that's my focus. And the hard thing about moving forward is sometimes you can't tell who are the white supremacists because there are great white people everywhere that trying to make the difference. To me, that's what makes the fight so hard about claiming your humanity. Because if what I call the enemy or the white supremacists were easily identifiable, things will be much different. But we cannot, as a human race or the Black people, you cannot lose your humanity because to me, the few are just hiding and taking advantage of their superiority in numbers. That's kind of what I just want to say, that to me, asking Jewish people how you would feel, I don't think it's a fair question because we are not a monologue. In that crowd, you could have
brother,
one African American.
I'm not assuming that all Black people are monolithic, nor am I assuming that all white people or all Jewish people are monolithic. I'm not even assuming that everyone has any emotional response at all. But we have a particular group of people who are here with us today. Some who are Black, some who are white, some who are Jewish, some who are Christian, some who we may not know what their background is. And so what I thought to raise is that when I look at that picture as a Black man, there is an identification that I have with the people that are hanging from the tree, because the reason why they're hanging from the tree was because they had skin that looked like mine. And the reason why I identify with the men that hung for those trees is because they were friends of my grandmother. So my question is, or was, whether or not white people who don't identify based on the color of skin with those who are hanging from the tree, if there is any emotional response, it doesn't mean that they feel in any monolithic way. I assume we may have as many different views and feelings as we have different people on this call. But it's a perspective that I haven't thought about it from before. And in the name of us trying to get to know each other and to spend time with each other and learn from one another, I find that there's some value in hearing the perspective of other people.
So I welcome the question, because we, Reverend Mjumbe and I promised each other that we would be truthful and we would be honest and that we would not shy away from hard questions. And I think that that we should be challenged. I think it's, you know, when non-Jewish people go to the Holocaust Museum or see a film about the Holocaust and they see children being murdered, I'm curious to know what non-Jewish people are feeling. I feel that's one of my own children that's there. And I think that it's a challenge of our humanity to get to the place where we see any of God's children as our own child being victimized. So I see Leslie Klein, and then either Steve or Irene Lieberman next, and then I see Ted Baker, I think. Yeah, Leslie.
Okay, hi, thank you for all your remarks. Okay, to be honest, looking at that picture of the lynching, because I have white skin, I cannot say that I feel like someone who has black skin who sees that picture. But because I am Jewish, I was very connected to this, to learning about Black history and the South. So I planned a vacation that my first stop was the Legacy Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and the memorial. Mm-hmm. And the memorial are these hanging pieces of metal that have the names of all the people lynched in every state. And Mississippi has the most, and New Jersey and New York, they had to combine them on one medal. But then and it totally reminded me of the Holocaust Museum, going to that lynching memorial. And then going to the museum itself, they have jars of ashes that were collected after the lynchings with people's names on it. Some don't, some do. And there were people next to me who said, I know that family. They knew people who were lynched from that family. They were standing right next to me, and there's jar after jar after jar of ashes. And then there was one, the last lynching in Alabama. You had to drive to the side of the road where there was a memorial. You really had to know about it to go there, which I did. And apparently that was the last one in Alabama. Successful Black man, and his daughter wrote a book and gives talks about it now. So I can't say that I identify with what you feel, but I certainly wanted to step into the shoes of Black people by planning this vacation that brought me to Selma and Montgomery and Birmingham and Memphis, go to all the civil rights museums, and that Legacy Museum and the memorial that's a mile from it, I think is mandatory for everyone. And I think that answers part of the Rabbi Gluck's question of how can we start feeling some humanity towards the other. We need to all go to these places.
I would add that there is something about the connection to one's own story. And if part of your story is a story of oppression, we are, the Jewish response to the enslavement in Egypt was to a commitment to never stop telling that story, so that we would never stop owning the feelings of what it was like to be oppressed. And when we tell our story, it's not to be particularistic, that it's only our pain and only our suffering, and it's we who matter. And our story, telling our story, does not close it. It actually opens up and is intended to open our hearts, that when we are in touch with the feeling when one owns victimization and oppression, It should enlarge one's ability to feel empathy for the suffering of others, because it says there's a kinship between those who have had to walk the path of the victim, that we know the heart, right? The Bible says, love the stranger, for you know the heart of the stranger.
Mhm.
I would say that is a guiding light for our time of allyship and fellowship between people who have known what it is to be the victim, that we
Right.
have a solidarity, because I can feel in my heart I can't necessarily feel what you feel, but I can feel something kindred to that, because I know that type of feeling.
Yeah. And tragically, when Black people, I'll just say it very quick, seek to tell their story and to remember that story, we're told that we're playing the race card. I'm sure we've all heard that phrase before. Or we're living in the past. Or don't you know we already overcame because Obama was elected president in 2008? Or we're soft on crime. Or we're making excuses. Or we're blaming the white man for all of our problems. Whenever we seek to remember our story, not just in the past tense, but also to talk about its living, present, contemporary, modern legacy, those are frequently the responses that we receive. So I'm sorry, I wanted to.
It's a corollary to when Jews are told, can you get over the Holocaust already?
Get over it, yeah.
Right, get over it. It's past already. When are you going to stop beating that drum of accusation of people for perpetrating the Holocaust? Steve or Irene, and then Ted.
The movie, I agree, is very hard to watch in one sitting. I couldn't do it. I've been alternately angry and very depressed about the whole situation. I, like many people, grew up watching the Nuremberg trials, the horrors of the Holocaust. Also, you've got intermarried family members. You have a Black brother-in-law. So just all, comes together. The how humanity forever, people can be treated so badly by others. And I like the question you asked, Reverend, because I thought, how could I relate to watching the scene of a lynching, those horrible postcards? I don't really relate to the people hanging, and I don't relate to the people in the scene, though God forbid I could have let myself be someone who could watch that. I hate to think that. And what can we do? As I was watching the movie and thinking about all of this, I can't watch this and not be a part of making the change. That's the depression. The anger is, what could we do? This is just wrong. So I'm obviously, the whole thing is very emotional, and I just feel like, something has to be done. We can't, and loving is good. We need to love. But I just want to work with some people, how we, at least on a local level, try to get beyond the current situation.
Ted Baker, thank you. Irene, and then Sandy.
Okay, so
wait, first Ted, Sandy.
Ted Baker from Temple Beth-El. First of all, I'd like to say for me, there's no way I can understand what a Black person feels who's pulled over by the police or accused of ridiculous crimes. We just don't have the same, there's just no way I can have a sensibility to that, no way I can really emotionally react to that. But I do have, I have experienced anti-Semitism, and that while it's not the same, I'm not drawing an equivalence, there's a little bit of something there that gives me at least a partial feeling. Secondly, my emotional reaction to the film was, well, first let me say that I grew up in New Jersey in the 50s and 60s. So I had a lot to do with the civil rights movement locally. I personally had a lot to do with the civil rights movement locally, where we had a lot of protests against barbers who refused to cut black hair and tried to get their licenses revoked and things like that. And my parents were even more involved, having visitors to the house, and they actually went down to Selma for the protest down there. So my emotional reaction to the film was that, if anything, at least in the North, things are worse than they were before. It's not that they haven't gotten better, they've actually gotten worse. It's more subtle, it's more hidden, but the actual facts the actual amount of discrimination, and because it's more subtle, that also contributes to making it worse. So I don't see that there's been any improvement over the 50 years or whatever it's been. And that's what the film said to me emotionally. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. I think it was Sandra. Sandy, were you next?
Yeah, I think I'm next. Okay,
Go ahead.
so I saw the film twice because I saw it the first time over a year ago, and then I watched it the other day. But while I was watching the crowd and the lynchings, my body and my mind felt the same way, sick, and it's not the first time it's felt that way, and I hope that that will be the last time. But I have lots of stories to say, but what I wanted to say is something on a very positive note. I've had the good fortune of living in a special neighborhood for 60 years where I raised my family. I'm Sarah's mother, Arnie's mother-in-law, and one of the Reverend's congregants is a neighbor of mine, and that's Cecilia Hodges. So we have a very different feeling about white and black because we all live together. And so we're all close friends and care about each other. So everybody can't live in a neighborhood like this, or maybe. But anyway, that's, you know, I don't want to take up any more time, but that's my story.
Mom, I would say that one of the reasons why your experience is unfortunately on the rare side is because when we think that racism was and Jim Crow were limited to the South, the more we study, the more we know, and the more we realize that it came up north also. New Jersey is one of the most segregated states in the country in housing and education and healthcare, and I mean, it just goes on and on. And it didn't happen by accident. It wasn't because people of similar backgrounds just wanted to live together. It's because there was redlining. It's because there were people who were limited in their options. It's because rents in certain neighborhoods were doubled when a person of color would show up. And I can tell you that as a small child, going to school in a racially integrated class had a profound impact on me. Having relationships and friendships with people of a different background was a natural thing for me. And I think that that's part of what inspired me and Lukata that we want to actually do this, because the more that we actually live with each other and connect with each other, the more we will grow feelings of friendship and love and caring. And I think that this is the way it goes. We move from knowing toward understanding, toward feeling, and ultimately that drives us toward action. And I think that's the trajectory that we need to enhance. And there is something at the root of that says that knowing intellectually is not enough. You need to know people as people.
That's right.
And know them, and to hear their story and to develop a sense of identification with them. Don't you dare mistreat my friend.
Amen. Anya, if we could have Leslie Young, and then Nicole, I see their hands up, and
Sure.
give them the opportunity to weigh in. And I think do we agree that maybe we'll stay together as one large group here instead of breaking up into smaller groups? Is that a good idea?
I think so. I think that this is a wonderful conversation. And I so appreciate everybody's open-heartedness and honesty. And
thank you all.
Leslie.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. I echo what you just said. I felt so much anger as watching this film and living through the redlining. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. And I remember a time when we could not live in a certain area as a, because we're as a Black family. and looking at all the busing situations come on, and looking at this film shows how they redesign these corporations, people redesign ways to keep other people down, keep us down, keep people of color down. And my reaction was the last word of what they said about, we have to, I think Van Jones said it, we have to look at the criminalization of things and embrace the humanity. So getting rid of, if we're coming together and talking about this is the first step, communication. And then finding ways to work together to show people who are against of people coming together who are trying to keep this quote unquote slavery ideal in place, showing them that as a group working together towards doing the right thing, bringing fairness, justice to everything, if they can see it, we might be able to change their hearts, but if you show them as a group that we're working towards it, you may change their hearts, you know, and have them join us. We have 74 million people who are who think differently. Yeah. So I think by doing the right thing, we have to find ways to do it.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. I don't know, Nicole, you had your hand up before. Did you have a question or a comment that you'd like to share, Nicole Onley?
I did, yes. Hi, I'm Nicole Onley. I'm Reverend Mjumbe's sister. I feel like an iceberg, you know, the only the upper half is shown. There's so much. I just watched the documentary again at about 12 o'clock today. And I felt like I should have broken it up because the emotions are so strong and visceral. But I've been listening, which is a key thing that I think is always a good thing to bring people together. And I'm listening and I'm reminded when I love the abundance of respect in everybody who is gathered here. And I know out of the respect is I can't imagine what it's like to be as a Black person. And I understand where you're coming from. To an extent. I won't do I have one Jewish friend, nope, but my mentor from many years ago in film school. And before that is a Jewish woman. I would say I stepped foot in the Holocaust Museum before I ever stepped foot in any Black history museum. And the thing that has taught me the most lessons about our connection and as connection as people is you got to get proximate. Sometimes if you say you can't understand the ones hanging from the tree, and that was one of the kinder ways that we have been killed. I would say maybe how many Black people, and I would say African Americans, Africans of the diaspora, do you know? And maybe because you don't live in neighborhoods where they are, you don't go to churches where they are, well, maybe we got to push ourselves a little further to reach out to each other. I have been blessed to have an in-home library, and I have taken years to study, to learn about what happened in the Holocaust. And there came a point when I said, but what about my Jewish brothers and sisters outside of the Holocaust? Because when you tend to see people as victims, I promise you're not seeing the whole of them. I am not your victim, as the movie documentary would say, I am not your Negro. I am not a victim. I am a full person. Ava DuVernay also did a wonderful documentary called When They See Us. When you see the whole of a person, when you don't just see us with a knee on our neck or hanging from a tree or dribbling a basketball, maybe you can see all of me, the me that went to one of the best film schools in the country, USC. And as I sat in that classroom as a graduate student, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the movie Roots, and they show the scene where Kunta Kinte is being whipped by the enslavers' henchmen she pauses the movie and says, "Nicole, what did you think of that scene?" Now I ask you, my brothers and sisters, could you even imagine if someone paused Schindler's List and asked you the same question? I knew then she had never been proximate to me. And so I challenge you, whatever way that you can, if you have a love of dogs, if you have a love of poetry, if you have a love of art, find people who don't look like you, who don't share your same faith, and see all of us, because we are so much more like you. We're so much more than the Holocaust. We share that in common, and we can cry together for the pain, but maybe we can get to a point where we can laugh together and say there are better days ahead.
Thank you, Nicole. Can I just be real open and honest about something here too, about who's not here? And Nicole, it's that being proximate to folks is so important. I don't know if you noticed, but as far as I can tell, and maybe I should go back and look before I say this to make sure, I think I see 2 Black males here on the call. And one, my brother, who is from, I think you say from Senegal, who said that he didn't discover he was Black until he came here. And let me just say this, that Black men often don't want to be a part of these conversations. This is actually the first one I've ever been a part of in this sort of way. I don't want to tell you about when I've been to jail. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about the people that I know and what they've gone through and what they're going through. Yet, there is a community of people that are in the epicenter of this system of mass incarceration in this country that we often do not hear their voices. And it's so important that we recognize that even some of us have been socialized by white supremacy into being dehumanized, that we can't speak, that we don't want to speak, that we don't want to expose ourselves to be vulnerable. We're already vulnerable to a system that can just snatch us up and lock us up and take us away from our families and strip us of our humanity. And so then we're going to reimpose more vulnerability on ourselves by sharing in these kind of settings. It's very difficult. And so some of the work has to be fueled by us moving forward and going ahead and acting and dealing with the institutional realities of this system that you have the ability to dismantle differently than maybe others. Like, I'm on calls all the time, and when Black people and Black men will talk to other Black men, I do it every 2 weeks as a group, and we deal with violence in our communities in Trenton, and we're talking about the strategies to deal with mass incarceration. But I would just encourage you to push to close the gap and recognize that even if you see some people only taking 1 step towards you as you take 3, then understand the system which also makes that a reality as well. And I just want to say this as a quick note, thank you. Thank you there were Liz and others who picked up, I just put it in the chat about Sundiata Acoli, a Black man who has been in prison since 1973. If you watched on the documentary around minute mark 47, you'll see Assata Shakur be interviewed, formerly known as Joanne Chesimard, who Van Jones talked about how she was liberated from prison and she's been in exile in Cuba. Well, Sundiata Acoli was the person who was driving the car that night that she was arrested and there was a shooting on the New Jersey Turnpike. And he has been in prison since 1973. And I thank you because there are members of Temple Beth-El that wrote letters to Sundiata Acoli on his 84th birthday last week, January 14th. And he told me that he got letters from some of you all, and he's writing you back. So thank you he was shocked. He was stunned. He said, wait, I got letters from people from a synagogue? What's going on out there? Has the world changed this much? And I said, I don't know how much it's changed, but maybe there's some people that are turning in the right direction. And a part of us getting people to write him letters on his birthday was for people to begin to see him as a human being. that has a birthday, 84 years. And so then we have to move to the next steps to actually then breaking down the system that continues to incarcerate him and so many others. So I want to thank you for that, but also explain that there's some work that we have to do to close this gap that is between us. And a lot of it is going to fall in imbalanced sort of ways in certain times, in certain places. And I saw Shirley Satterfield. I saw your hand up, and I don't know if she's still with us, but
Shirley's there. Shirley, would
I'm
you like?
still with you. Thank you very much. Yes. I wanted to speak when someone said they didn't know that there was segregation in New Jersey. Lots of segregation in New Jersey. I grew up 6 generations in Princeton. I went to the Witherspoon School for Colored Children. I went to the Colored Y, that is now the Arts Council. Our 4 churches in this community were started back in the 1800s. All of my relatives are buried in the colored section of the cemetery. So yes, this was a segregated Princeton. And we were not allowed to shop on Nassau Street. So we had everything in our community that's now called the Witherspoon Jackson community that goes from Jackson Street that is no longer there. It's now Paul Robeson Place down to Birch Avenue. And most of our families were domestic workers. My grandmother was a school teacher. She taught at the first Witherspoon School for Colored Children, and Paul Robeson was her primary, his primary teacher. I went to the second Witherspoon School for Colored Children. I never knew what segregation was until they integrated the schools. When I was in 3rd grade, I went to Nassau Street School. That was a school where white kids went. That became the elementary school. Thing is that it was integrated on the outside and segregated on the inside because the teachers taught us differently. When I went to Princeton High School, no one told me about college. They said, if you want to go to college, you can either be a teacher or a secretary. Never saw a guidance counselor the whole 4 years I was at Princeton High School. I got to college because of my mother. I went to Bennett College for Women, a Black college in North Carolina. And there they tell you about segregation. They hit you in the face with it. And you see the signs. There were no signs in Princeton, but you knew your place. And I was with the Greensboro 4, the 4 guys who went to A&T. And I sat at the counter in Greensboro with the Greensboro 4. And we were taught how to be nonviolent. And we sat at the counter and they threw things at us. They spit at us. They pulled at us. They called us names. And all we could do was sit there. It was frightening, but we did it. I thought that was the end until I went to Las Vegas. My first teaching job was in Las Vegas. And I was in a segregated section of Las Vegas, teaching in a Black school. I was there for 4 years, went to Syracuse. And after I was there teaching, moved to Murray Hill, New Jersey. And I taught in Summit. And I taught at a school. I was the only Black other than the janitor and the cook. And they I was there because they needed somebody Black in that school. There were no Black students. I was the only one. Until I found out how I was treated okay, but they treated me not like they treated the cook and the janitor. And I understood when I got on the bus and we were going to see a play about Harriet Tubman. And we got on the bus and the Black kids from the east side of Syracuse, of Murray Hill, were on the bus. And the kids did not want to get on the bus. And I told them, I said, look at me. I'm your teacher. I'm just like those kids that are on the bus. So I tried very hard to teach at a school in East Las Vegas. They didn't want me to leave, but I did. My kids went to school and they were in kindergarten and they went to school when we lived in Murray Hill. And they faced a lot of problems because there were only 2 Black kids in the school. And then after I left Syracuse, Summit, I moved to East Windsor. There were burning crosses in Twin Rivers because many of the Jewish people from New York moved to Twin Rivers. That's where I lived. So and one of the students that I taught, I was their guidance counselor at Hikestown High School. And I was with him for 1 year as I taught him English and 4 years as I was his guidance counselor. His senior year, he sat in my office and he looked at me and he said, I was Collins then. He said, Miss Collins, I just want you to know that all my family is KKK, but I like you. Now, what was I to say to that? But this is what I faced. It seems like everywhere I went, I was facing something. So I
That's
said,
what said. Yep. I'm sorry for interrupting you, Shirley.
Pardon me?
I said, please go ahead and finish up, and
Okay,
then
I'm going to finish up. I want to finish up. I want to get to this point. Okay. So I said when I left Princeton, I never come back to Princeton, but I did. I came back home. And when I came back home, I saw that there was nothing talked about African Americans in Princeton. So that's when we did the history of the African Americans in Princeton, which is very necessary because African Americans in Princeton made this town. And so that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say. But I just wanted to get that through.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you. Liz Cohen want to say something, then I think we want to move to close. As much as we would, well, let's not say this will be the end of the conversation. Let us say.
Well, we have to get to the action part. We're going to get to that. That next time we have to deal with the action part and what we're going to do together.
Absolutely.
I was going to get to, yes.
Liz?
Well, first I want to thank you, Shirley, for always being my friend and my light, and
I am your friend.
opening our eyes. Nicole, what you had said about seeing, this is so much of the work we have to do. We don't know what we don't see. And what the movie showed us was the monumental efforts that are made to keep us from seeing. Part of incarceration is about removing so that we don't see difference in our communities, and the anger and seething emotion that fights the efforts that we do make to see and to humanize. It's a tall mountain that we have to climb together to fight this, and I'm so glad to be doing this together. Oh, one more quick thing. In writing to our new friend in prison, I'm sorry, I've just lost his name. I was really struck that, thank you, that the letters had to be black on white, no color, no celebration, no humanizing to mark his birthday. That even that small act, just wanted to note that.
Isaiah said that every valley shall be raised up and every mountain laid low. And I believe Dr. King quoted the prophet in saying that. So we need to lower the barriers and lift up our compassion and continue to grow, all of us. And I'm so grateful for all of you who participated. I'm particularly grateful to you, Lukata, for, again, opening your arms and opening your heart to begin this relationship. Both of us come from a background of organizing, and I think that that's what we connected in each other, this notion that we want to see action, we want to see movement, we want to see sustained commitment to change where it needs to happen. So I pledge on behalf of Temple Beth-El that we will continue to walk with you, to pray with you, and I think Nicole Onley, you are so right, to laugh with you, to celebrate with you, to share our joys with you, and to help to repair the world together. So thank you all for joining with us. I've asked Reverend Mjumbe if you want to say a last word first and then close us in prayer.
Sure, and I know I just see Sandy shaking her hand. I want to Sandy, just very quickly say your word, and then I'll close this up.
Okay, I feel we're all so lucky to have been part of this, and I'd like to share it. So will this, I see it's recorded. Will there be an opportunity to send it to some other friends?
I see no reason.
We're working on that, Sandy.
What?
We'll work on that.
Okay, because I was thinking particularly of the organization Not in Our Town, which has a big following.
Right. And so, and that's a good segue. In terms of our next steps, I'm actually going to be talking with Not in Our Town on February the 1st.
Oh,
talking about the lies that we tell to ourselves and to one another at the beginning of Black History Month. And I really hope that we will look forward to moving forward in truth together into the work that we need to do. I'm thankful for the letter writing, and I think that that's an important first step. I look forward to when things open up, and I would go and just spend time in the juvenile courthouse in Trenton, and go and sit with a young person who was at the beginning of a prison pipeline. And being present, and to begin to see and to know and to hear and to understand. There's a lot of legislative activities, and Rabbi Arnie and I are going to have some great organizing work that we're going to be doing together as we move forward. We've even talked about finding ways to bring our young people who are in the Confirmation Academy at Temple Beth-El, along with those who are being confirmed at Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church, and getting them to be talking with each other and getting them be in relationship and partnership with each other. So the road ahead is filled with possibilities, and let's just commit that this is an important step in a long journey. To reach a distant goal, it takes many small steps, and this is but one of them, but we're committed to do it together. So thank you, Rabbi Arnie, for inviting me and inviting Witherspoon Street Presbyterian Church into this conversation. We look forward to continuing to find ways to be connected with each of you, whether it be as a whole congregation, but hopefully individually. Now I'm going to have to find the time to walk around the corner and visit with Liz and David. They live right around the corner from me. I run past their house periodically, and so now I need to stop and schedule some time, and I'm so excited about what God is going to do with and through our communities. Let us pray. Lord God, you are an awesome and a mighty God. You are worthy to be praised. You are the God that has brought us through and has brought us to. You have never left us. You have never forsaken us. You did not leave us when we were in bondage in Egypt. You did not leave us as we went through 40 years in the wilderness. You did not leave us as we crossed over the Jordan into a promised land. You did not leave us when we were taken into exile in Assyria. You did not leave us when they tore down the walls and took us into Babylon. You did not leave us when we were under the weight of empire, whether it be Persian or Greek or Roman or even American. You did not leave us in the midst of a Holocaust, dear Lord, under Nazi Germany. You did not leave us as we were brought across an ocean, dear Lord, and dehumanized, dear Lord. You have been with us. You have never left us or forsaken us, and we call upon your name now. Continue to speak to us. Continue to remind us that sometimes it is in the earthquake we can hear you, sometimes in the thunder, sometimes in the fire, but sometimes in the still small voice. Give us the ability to hear your voice speaking through the voices that we heard today. The men and women who have been shocked and horrified and nauseated and educated and inspired and angered by what we saw in 13th. The work is still ahead of us. There's so much that is behind us. There's so much which is around us. But we know that together, connected with and through you, that together we will win, that we will be one people, serving one God, seeking and fulfilling one destiny. And in your name we pray together and we say together, Amen.
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 Thank you all. Blessings to you. Rabbi Arnie, until next time, God bless you.
Amen. God bless you and your whole community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Witherspoon.
And blessings to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.